Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this guidance. This content is being rebroadcast from the Amara 2_MK channel to the main 2_MK channel with full permission. Today we are looking at our FalkeBot, and a lot of what you hear on this stream in terms of inputs will be repeats of things that were covered in Wednesday's prototype work stream. Most of the inputs have not been changed. However, we have done more development in terms of how the bot should be approached and what the point systems and purposes of it are. But for the sake of clarity, once again, I will go through all of the inputs and certain combinations of those inputs to clarify what they are for, how lenient they are, and how you should attempt to put them in. As always, our bot will be available on Sunday at our website 2-mk.org, and you will be able to get more information there to supplement what is visible on this stream. Note that for Falk, the gauges are all auto-recover for her, and for the player, all of the gauges are normal. So, beginning our review with obviously Action 1. Action 1 is a very simple input. It is just a first frame crouching medium kick into a V trigger activation. If Falk has the space to get this done, given that she always uses her V trigger 2 for the bot, she is also capable of doing her entire combo through this. So, it is an edge shifted double quarter circle forward motion intended to allow her to do her critical art. In order for her to actually do her critical art, therefore, she will need that. Unlike most of our bots where it is not important to make sure that they have the input that gives them critical art, we consider it important for FalkeBot for reasons that will be elaborated on later. However, the overall input is relatively easy and it is relatively lenient. The difficulty is in the first frame down medium kick. The reason this is needed is because she needs at least one input which will allow her to do her directly vertical dive kick even if she doesn't do it that often. And her crouching medium kick, while it only combos into one thing, is a useful thing to combo into her Psycho Angriff and various activations of Psycho Angriff, giving the player a decent idea of what the opponent might try to do and fail, and therefore how to punish it. This is obviously related to a point system, therefore. Falk's Action 2 is a relatively complex input. It is not easy to see from what is being shown on the screen right now, but Falk actually is pressing, first of all, the V skill button along with a triple kick, or you can just hit medium punch and triple kick, whatever works easiest for you. Since this has no direction that needs to go with it, it is functional as a first frame regardless. It is, however, important that you do not plink it. Even though it looks a bit as if it's being plinked now, that second V skill that you see is actually at the end of the input. Otherwise, you need to have a half circle or nearly half circle backward on the up side of your stick or controller. This is to give Falk the capacity to jump randomly when she is touched or poked in some way. She is very likely to stand still and just throw out this button. It covers a lot of space in front of her in most situations and tends to trade with other buttons that are intended to get through her. However, obviously it is not that strong a move and it is actually unsafe, but not by much. We do not necessarily intend for you to get points by punishing this move, and she does extend her box enough that she can use it to stay out of most people's ranges. But she needed to have it because it is likely that many lower level players will be using this in neutral, and even higher level players will probably have a spacing where it is very helpful to them to throw out this button and hope that they don't get whiff punished for it. It is a much easier button to whiff punish than it is to stop, but it will also depend on the strength of your character's long range attacks, since often they must be whiff punished with a special and you have to wait a certain amount of time to do this. Falk has a lot of different point systems. Specifically, she has 3 standard ones and one that is very variable and will depend on your character. We will give suggestions in the page that we put up for the release, or you can choose your own. Falk's third input is also relatively simple. It begins with a triple punch. Nothing required other than that at all. During the animation of that move, she needs to do a down forward heavy kick, followed by a standing medium kick. Her standing medium kick is able to combo into various things and is one of her better footsie buttons. If she lands that button and you have ended the recording correctly, she is likely to be able to combo it into either Psycho Schneider or her catapult kick. Whether or not you hold that medium kick at the end of her input is entirely up to you. And the page will explain exactly why this is, but she does have options that appear as a result of you either holding the medium kick or releasing it. So as you know, it can be a little hard to tell when these repeat, so I changed that off. She does do the triple punch first. This input is also relatively lenient, but you might want to poke at her a little bit and see if you can make sure that she can actually do a certain combo. It is not easiest to do it with just 3 though, so that is probably your best option. Block Psycho Schneider, hit her with a light, probably. And see what she does after that. As you can see, she's able to do this in order to keep you out. And you will learn more of the properties of this move as you go. But if you must test it, she should be able to do what you just saw. You block Psycho Schneider and poke her with something, and at least some of the time, especially if you poke her a little late, she should be able to hit the medium kick and combo back into the Psycho Schneider. Obviously, learning to punish Psycho Schneider is an important part of the game, but Whether or not it's a point system may in fact end up being up to you depending on your character. FalkeBot's action 4 is also quite simple. This is the one that has changed since it was demoed on Wednesday. She now has both holding the heavy punch in order to maximize the amount of charge she gets, even though this does not help in the way you'd expect. She doesn't actually use it. And since it was not a first frame input, she does this more often. If you make this input first frame, there are some changes that will happen to the bot. Mainly that she will be more likely to shoot and less likely to do this move. This input is relatively difficult to do because it is not as lenient as the others. During that forward heavy punch, you need to make sure to put in first a backdash, and secondly another half circle backward on the upside of the stick or controller. Again, to maximize the amount of random jump she does when she's poked at. This random jump also works with her heavy punch. But as you can see here, she can get into a rhythm where she is jumping and hitting her heavy punch instead, which is a good change for her to have in here, so you're not always sure that she'll always be doing exactly this. The backdash was added in order to make her more of a keep away character, as well as making certain things harder, because if you do manage to hold the heavy punch right until the end, it will interact favorably with action 5. The point system does involve that particular move because it is -10, and for many characters, dashing forward after it or doing certain approach moves after that move are useful to them. Even at her max range, it is not particularly something you must respect all the time. It depends on your character quite a lot. For a few characters, however, there really is no answer, and you will therefore not have that as part of your point system. Adding it to her list of multiple points that are reliant on whether or not you play Ed or Dalsim or similar. Action 5 in this case was not done as the throwaway, but rather as the relatively difficult input. For this input you must press a crouching medium punch on the first frame and hold it for the entirety of the input, making it a relatively hard input to do. After that crouch medium punch, you are hitting a crouch heavy punch. You can hit it more than once or whatever suits you. This is to help with her having anti-air spacing and to demonstrate another thing that might be important. When played by itself, this will do next to nothing because she will just repeat that over and over. She needs at least one other input combined with 5 to make this work. However, we do not suggest removing or releasing the medium punch just to get her to shoot, or waiting longer so that you can do it. This is because she has the capacity to do it with nearly every other input. Even if all you want to practice is how to deal with a particular point system of the bot, which is always there, you really only ever need to add one input to this, and she will gain the ability required. Specifically, the ability to jump, usually straight up, but not always, depending on if you hit her or not. And fire in the air at you. She also obviously has the capacity to do the jumping medium punch and the jumping heavy punch. Given the range on Falk's regular grounded shot, we did not make any effort to give her the ability to do that shot in neutral. However, she does have the ability to do that shot after you block this move. She may use it as a frame trap, or she may just fire it basically as a cancel. However, as you can see, you do actually have to be fairly close to her for this to work. We suggest that if you want to practice specifically that you use actions 4 and 5. However, you can try other actions and you can take more actions at the same time as long as 4 and 5 are on. 3 is another good option to add here. In fact, I will do that and demonstrate why that can be important. This is effectively allowing Falke to play footsies at least somewhat, given that she can still hit the medium kick even if she does not have the range to hit with Psycho Schneider or with her Crouch Heavy Punch. She still has at least the capacity that she will land and or be hit and hit you with the medium kick and then still do things. So you can see from this alone that she will be relatively defensive, keep you out, but possibly give you a lot of chances to punish Psycho Schneider if this is all you have on. It is very difficult to put Falke in a situation where she does not have some relatively punishable stuff, because she tends to have punishable stuff. Without action 1, Falke is generally unable to do her low shot. However, all of the information we have found online and in our own testing of the character indicates that this is not likely to be a very heavy part of her game plan, except against other zoners. However, she does have the capacity to make this shot in certain situations, especially on cancels. Which seemed like another good place to approximately put it. So since, just like the grounded shot, which she basically will not do unless she has hit with the Crouch Heavy Punch, the low shot is the same thing. This can be changed by holding a different button for a different one. It makes the inputs relatively difficult, but there will be information on our site as to how to set that up. The reason we have not prioritized this is that everything we can find indicates that Falke's ground shot is extremely easy to jump over and punish from most ranges. Therefore, we attempted to make sure she used it from a range where it might be surprising and duck under some buttons that people would use to try to whiff punish her or similar things. So, with all that said, we will go into the universal point systems, and for this you often need to turn on most of the inputs, but the first one can be demonstrated with just 3, 4, and 5, or even just 4 and 5, but this makes it a little harder and clearer why it's difficult. When Falke jumps, she has the option of hitting either her Heavy Punch or shooting. With action 3 on, it's less likely she'll do either of those two things specifically, and you'll have to figure out what she's doing. For some characters, you can avoid her shot completely by jumping forward and still land an attack. For some it is very easy to land the attack, and for others it is harder, but we have not yet found a character who is completely unable to do anything. The question is more so, can you read the spacing to know which of the 2 or 3 somethings that are easily available to you you should actually do? This is why Falke also needed to have potential for jumping forward, even though she generally will not shoot when doing those things. Just to keep you on your toes and understand her potential air ranges. But as you can see, getting over Falke's attack is possible even from basically your maximum range. She does not have good range on most of her normals, so you get to stay out of the range of her normals. And if she chooses to jump forward and shoot, you have an anti-air. If she chooses to jump upward and shoot, you generally can jump forward at her. If she chooses to jump backward and shoot, functionally you can do the same thing, but it depends on the character. She's also relatively limited in how exactly she can shoot. She has a height restriction that is somewhat problematic for many situations. And she does not do that much damage with this shot in the first place. Understanding when to empty jump because you're late, all of these little things are required to understand how to get to Falke by jumping. And this is relatively hard even when you're used to observing her. But it is a fundamentally much stronger option for you than Falke gets out of managing to shoot you because you tried to jump. You can stand right about there, and Falke's options are diminished. The other side of this is the same forward heavy punch as mentioned before, which you can end up blocking. But at this range, which is the range you should generally be trying to hold, you should be able to dash up and block against a lot of what Falke does with most characters who have faster dashes. Some characters have even better options in terms of getting close to her. Though these options do not tend to be fast, they are often hard-ish to react to. Falke has the option of hitting Psycho Schneider to deal with a ton of them, however. Them being multi-hit moves also helps the matter. Your aim is generally not to actually manage to hit her, but rather to deal with her if she tried to do anything herself. Birdie being a good example of this. As you can see, there's really not much threat to you here, so the footsies game has more to do with Falke advancing on you. This is going to work in a lot of cases because most characters do not have buttons that they can push to keep Falke out, that she cannot then whiff punish. It leads to an interesting playstyle, but not really a defensive one. So, in terms of point system, you are looking for hitting Falke with jumps based on making sure you get her when she has jumped there. Your other option that you should count as a point is if you jump after Falke does anything. Because of her high incidence of anti-air style moves, you can see most of the time which move it is you interrupted. But a lot of the time, you're not really trying to jump to hit her, you are aiming to safe jump. If you manage to land next to Falke and block, only after her neutral jump, mind you, but if Falke does jump straight up, you land next to Falke and block. If your bot is correct, which is relatively easy to do, you should also take a point for that specific situation. Except if you saw her do that medium kick. and only that medium kick, so it's not a whole lot of things you need to keep track of. So you get a point like that, where you have hit Falk before she even comes back down. You get a point for hitting her right as she lands. As not a counter hit, it's important that it is not a counter hit, because at that point it means you have hit her because she has no trip guard. She can be attacked for a certain amount of time after making an attack in the air, even though she should normally have been able to block. But once you get this, you may find you jumped a little too late. It's not a good idea to actually land an attack. If you hold yourself back from hitting the button, and Falk fails to anti-air you, you can also take a point for that. Up to you if you take a point for the bat dash, but the only time you should not take the point is when you would have been hit by the medium kick, had it been a higher medium kick. The heavy punch is more likely to whiff because of the timing and the startup, as is Psycho Schneider to some extent. Because for this to work, you have to use your own trip guard. You have to land without attacking and be able to block, thereby effectively baiting Psycho Schneider and setting up for that punish. You can also take a point, of course, for punishing any Psycho Schneider that does happen in that situation, but it's a rarish move to happen directly after that. So again, you're specifically watching for when Falk jumps, and you jump in like that, and she tries the anti-air but fails. This is also why she uses both the medium kick and that heavy kick, because both of these moves, while not necessarily outright safe in the medium kick's case, is still your turn. For the heavy kick it is not. So she gets at least some options to show off to you why this does not just work. You have to bait her into actually anti-airing, and it's not as simple as just jumping at her all the time. So the point system based around that is two-sided. It is not two separate things that you're getting points for. It is you're jumping. If you happen to hit her because she shot, you get a point. If you happen to hold yourself back, safe jump in time, block, you get a point just for blocking. If you happen to safe jump Psycho Schneider itself, you get a point for separately punishing that. Even if you were not giving yourself points for Psycho Schneider as a generality, you should still give your points in that situation. So, moving on from there, there are points related to dashing as mentioned. So let's turn off action 3 for the moment, just to demonstrate this more accurately given the amount of time she should do it. Birdie is not a great character for this, please note. The specifics of the block stun of her moves are what made us think that the practice wouldn't be necessary. So she does the forward heavy punch. She is minus 10. You cannot punish it unless you are close. You have a lot of good punishes if you're close for most characters. But most of the rest of the time, you are hoping for and relying on being able to do something to get you close to her, and that something be safe on block, or if you have a really fast dash, dash forward and just block. This then opens up opportunities for you to punish other things. If your perception of how to fight Falk is to stay away from her entirely, or move around her in some way, you don't really have to do this, and you may want to change it out even though this is functionally a universal point. The point you're getting is for having a response to the forward heavy punch. We are just suggesting that that response be a dash up. The bot should manage to punish you for doing things that are outright bad ideas, often enough that you will be able to tell and stop giving yourself points for doing them if you happen to be giving yourself too many points for just dashing up and throwing or doing whatever. If your bot is input correctly, chances are you should not be able to just dash in and throw her. You can test by turning on action 2. At least some of the time she should punish you for trying that. And of course, you can spend some time learning exactly where you can stand that she won't be able to do anything to you. We added the backdash as an additional insurance against the simplest answer, which is basically dash up throw. Depending on what character you have, it may feel as if this is a really good option a lot of the time. But the added backdash has shifted her just a bit more so that it's not easy to do this as a generality. Her continual need to respace herself can also shift it. If you dash early enough, if you dash correctly enough, you might get something. But it also depends partially on where she hit you from. So sometimes she will just crouch block and you will not be able to get anything if you throw. Sorry, other than throw. And sometimes she will backdash so that you could try to throw and fail. Also, obviously timing your throw is very character dependent. And she has similar things to Ed where understanding when to dash up and try certain things is important to your game plan. So you will be able to get used to the idea that the opponent should have of, well, if you're going to try to dash up to me, I'll just dash away and probably be fine. The last of the more obvious punishes, the universal ones. Not that specifically, but that. It seems like a really easy punish, but you need a maximum punish on this, which can actually be relatively hard depending on the opponent's spacing and your character. It is important to learn how to do this, even though it is highly likely that Falke players will be more likely to play V-Trigger 1 for a while, especially in the lower levels. It's more interesting, quote unquote. But it may surprise you how difficult it is to punish that move. Specifically though, we're not looking for the punish when she just does it raw and neutral. You're trying to get to this space. This is somewhat a bit more like a kata than our usual bots are, because you are trying to occupy a particular space to begin with, and at that space, if she happens to do it, you are punishing that. A lot of this is about learning to inch forward against Falke correctly, but not that you're actually trying to get all that close. Now, of course, the V-Trigger activation is extremely punishable and really not relevant. Falke's rhythm changes entirely when you let her hit you, which is important for the bot as well. With this current input, if you do get her to hit you, both her spacing and the general moves she is using change. I will demonstrate this more when I turn on all the inputs, but for now understand that the bot appears less dangerous when you are not able, when you are doing well and you are not taking any damage and it is not able to open you up. It is automatically less dangerous. This is a property of the character, so that's basically what you're learning. However, if Falke starts to land hits and do damage, her flow changes quite a lot. Part of the reason that this turned out to be how we developed the bot was simply that tactically, the way you should end up fighting this character in most matches where you actually have any trouble with her is Falke will manage to get the life lead somehow. And you will have to deal with the fact that she got the life lead, which means you have to inch in on her. If you have the life lead, it is relatively easy to just play the other way. If you play far away from Falke, she has no ways to really open you up or do damage that don't open her up terribly. But if she does get the life lead, or a very strong confirm of any kind, you are likely to take a lot of damage yourself. As you can see, it is extremely hard, given the very small amounts of damage Falke normally does, to build back up to that. However, if she can land the CA, or various tricks into CA, she has a decent chance of making you uncomfortable this way. For this reason, we set her gauges both to full, because we want to create the feeling of stress where Falke has the maximum amount of comeback potential. And since bots work on the principle of you needing to get a certain amount of points before you are defeated, the mental stress of doing this against a bot that can easily do massive amounts of damage to you, as demonstrated here, helps somewhat with the feeling of simulating the Falke matchup. You are supposed to feel as if you are winning, and then Falke lands one stray hit and a third of your life disappears. And since you are still counting points and trying to get things in a certain amount of time, it is going from being at 8 points and going, oh, this is easy, I have lots of life left, I've got this, to borderline dead, can't afford to make any mistakes. So we needed to maximize her capacity to keep that up as much as possible. Therefore, all of the point systems, coupled with the fact that Falke moves forward very, very seldom, mean that the player simulates the feeling of trying to get points, trying to get victory by getting in on Falke. This is not to say that this is your best tactic as a general thing. If you have the life lead, there is no reason to go in. However, bots are meant to simulate situations in which you need to pull out a win, you need to practice something difficult in order to overcome a more powerful opponent. And this one is not they're not necessarily matchup or meant to teach you a game plan. So in this case, all of the main point systems are based around the idea that you have to try to get in on Falke at least. And if you do it incorrectly, you are at risk of taking relatively large amounts of damage and lessening the chances of you getting to your 10 points before you lose. So it is through that effort to simulate the psychological aspect of the Falke matchup that her gauges are the way they are, and the requirements, the main 3 requirements, are what they are. So now I'll go briefly into certain characters for whom particular of the universal ones are very easy, and for whom they are very hard, and how we suggest dealing with both the point system and Falke herself to make your training as useful as possible while doing this. On our Wednesday stream, I demonstrated with Ryu and somewhat with Chun-Li, who both have very fast dashes. They are most able to get to Falke after certain things, and they both have relatively good jumps as well. Their ability to punish her for the long range attack she does, or to make sure they don't get whiff punished while trying to play footsies with her, because they often have to, is a lot smaller. So I won't be showing them off until the end, but I will go into some characters who have much less capacity to get in on her by dashing. And as mentioned before, I will be starting with Bison because of the interaction between Bison and Falke in terms of hitboxes and dashes. And Bison suffers in this matchup in terms of getting close to Falke on the ground, and Falke might want to stay there longer. He also doesn't have a lot of really good options for getting close to her other than scissor kick, which could lead to problems. He is, however, quite strong in the dealing with her neutral jump or forward jump shot phase of the matchup. You can expect the Falke player therefore to stay on the ground more, and therefore for Bison, if you were to remove one of the universal ones to make it harder on him, you should remove his point for jumping and hitting her, because he's relatively good at it. He's also good at dashing when she uses either the air shot or the ground shot. So good, in fact, that we didn't even really think about meaningfully using that. He jumps forward quite far, as you can see. But the most difficult part for him probably is dealing with her forward heavy punch. However, he also has some difficulty punishing the longer ranges of her Psycho Angrif swings, especially since his jump is actually so far that the range he needs to stand at to be useful against her and not get hit by a bunch of other weird things is a little bit confusing. Fortunately, this is made up for by his long throw range. But rather than go into a whole talk about how exactly Bison should do this, I will simply point out how easy that is to do. He can hit her because of his relatively high and floaty jump from extremely far away in reaction to her shot, with very little danger to him. He can also use that to get into certain positions against her that would otherwise be difficult. And that is yet another option. So you shouldn't really expect that Falke players will be spending a lot of time trying to hit Bison with air shot, because it would generally be a poor decision. However, of course, still practice, just in case you find someone who has not yet understood that about the matchup. Just note that when you want to make the situation harder for yourself, you probably shouldn't be keeping the point for that. However, he does benefit quite a lot from practicing punishes based on punishing Psycho Schneider, because of the number of times he will be out of range of his more standard combos. And since he has to spend at least some time pursuing Falk, and his better crush counter being a standing one, he does have some things to worry about in terms of that. So bear that in mind for Bison. Range-wise, it may be more difficult to land some of Bison's stronger combos, and therefore he should keep the Psycho Schneider punish as part of his higher difficulties. Once again, we will put almost all of this on the site to clarify our suggestions for various characters, making for a much more complex points system section than most bots. But I believe you can sort of get the idea. When she does the forward heavy punch, you get different types of reactions. Getting into position by dashing when she does various things is relatively easier, though you might get hit if you mistime it. But for him, the spacing for these punishes can become difficult. And recognizing before you even hit the heavy kick, oh, the position I'm in is not the best position for this, or I shouldn't go for that at all, I should use this move instead. As usual, with our crush counter style or long punishes, you are supposed to use the most meter intensive punish. Because again, against Falk, you need to maximize your capacity to get and hold the life lead so as to make her life as miserable as possible. And we all know Bison is all about that. He's also one of the characters who is most capable, despite the fact that he has a slow dash, most capable of giving her stress after dashing in. Because while she can punish him, he also has other moves entirely that do the job much better. For example, rather than bother to dash in to punish, he can just use ES Scissors to make sure he is plus and right in her face, and she's not a very strong character under that scenario. Note obviously again that the more often you spend doing very little in neutral with Falk, the more often she will just do the basic stuff that she's been doing the entire time, and she will not appear to be very dynamic at all. However, Bison's ability to dash through some of Falk's normals, and I absolutely assure you he can get, if not a punish, at least enough pressure to make her want to do something else and possibly get herself in trouble for trying, means you have a lot of good options. He also can slide, but that's really not the point. However, that is what brings us to our next most obvious demo. The character who, for certain things, will be very stressed in terms of getting points of particular types. The way that FalkeBot works now means that Dhalsim has few options for very effective ways of getting his points against her. The options Dhalsim has are in fact all quite good, but they are extremely specific, and therefore he's limited. Dhalsim players have a lot of training to do on this matchup to make sure that everything that they want to do is effective enough. The most obvious answer is for him to stay about here and when she neutral jumps, try to hit her. But the way that Falk's hitbox works on the air shot means that you really don't get to do this. So the next option would obviously be use the crouch medium punch instead. Very good for when she doesn't shoot. But as you can see, if the Falk player is playing correctly spaced, he actually misses under her entirely. And I'm pretty sure that yes, there we go. If he doesn't, he'll probably trade because of the spacing that she was at the time. Sniping her out of the air before she even gets to fire is a good option, but does lead to a lot of situations where Dhalsim is watching for something that is not so easy to do without making himself vulnerable to other things. It also doesn't really lead to that much damage, and if she happens to hit a different button, specifically her crouch heavy punch at a particular point of the jump, he's probably going to take a bad trade. So, your better option is honestly just to slide under all of it. This is phenomenally easy to do, and none of her attacks except her instant jump stomp really give Dhalsim any reason to not do this. All he has to do is respond to whether or not she hit anything in the air at all, functionally. If she does not, however, as you can see, the bot still gives you some stress because even though you can use the medium slide to get under, and you should in fact be practicing which slide to use, it's still a stressful thing. For many situations, for many characters, the better answer is in fact to get under her attacks, but not everyone can do this, as noted, and for some of us jumping is just a better idea. Dhalsim can absolutely get over and hit her, however, as you can see. It's just that the spacing and the general Dhalsim game plan means he's more likely to miss than most other characters. And with your basic options of just poking her out of the air, you still have to jump. That's the important part. He can do it with a lot of buttons, and he can time a lot of things very well. They just generally don't do much damage, and always involve in jumping either way. But most importantly, Dhalsim is the character with the least capability to safe jump Falk because he takes so long to come down. He has to do all sorts of different things and be ready to do those things in the air on reaction to either whiffing his button or whatever, but if you did hit a button in the first place, mostly he can't do those things. Still, once he has committed to a safer jump, he has some good options. The point is that for him, the way that the interaction happens is slightly different, but you shouldn't be thinking of it in the same way as other characters. If you're a Dhalsim player though, you probably know all this already and should not have any serious problems deciding whether or not to hit, to teleport, to Yoga Gale, those sorts of things. And of course you always have the option of just staying up there. But if you were having problems with Falk in general, unfortunately, Dhalsim also has a relatively slow dash, so if you try to deal with just her stand heavy punch, her forward heavy punch for example, you are not likely to have as much luck. However, he does get a lot of good whiff punishes off slide stuff. So that's a plus. The long startup of Dalsim's normals means that he has a lot of other ways of dealing with her. But most of them have to do more so with being comfortable in the footsie game where other characters would not generally be, because he knows that if he hits slower buttons, he's actually at a decent chance of hitting Falk, since she also has slow normals and can't just easily poke out a bunch of buttons to hurt him a lot. She can totally hit him, but they don't lead to much. That's probably her best bet to shield herself against him, and he can always just do that. This means that for the most part, given the number of options Dalsim has, once you have practiced them enough, he's the opposite of Bison. You should generally assume that you must practice a lot in getting the damage based on jumping in. But maybe make yourself jump in instead of using the slide, which will solve a lot of your problems in terms of spacing. Which brings us to the Dalsim specific tech. Specifically that Dalsim can whiff punish some of Falk's normals with light Yoga Fire. For some reason it doesn't seem to work as well with heavy or medium, but I might just not be understanding the character quite enough at that deep a technical level to say how it should or should not work. In other words, since Dalsim normally would have some problems dealing with Falk just zoning her directly, his easier option is to move to a space where she might want to stick out buttons. And much like Colleen's Hail, use this as a whiff punish style tool, because when Falk sticks out a button like that, assuming that she does not hit Dalsim, she spends so long recovering that she would no longer immediately have an answer to the Yoga Fire. This limits her quite a lot in terms of what she can do to Dalsim afterwards, whereas most characters will dash in after or something. They're able to recognize, oh, I have the space under that fireball to do something now. Falk does not seem to have a really good answer to this that doesn't involve her making herself unsafe just for the attempt. The specifics of how to count the points for this are difficult, but overall, you should consider it that standing outside of Falk's footsie range and attempting to do Yoga Fire on reaction to seeing her button might be enough to get you through the matchup with some serious damage on her side, and not much damage to yourself. And as you can see, if you mess it up, either by spacing or misunderstanding her intentions, you can get hurt fairly badly. If you're too slow, same thing happens. This is a good way to make Falk jump as well, because she's not a character you can generally drill at as far as we can tell. But this interaction is actually fairly strong for you, because of the way that Psycho Schneider and even her Crouch Heavy Punch interact with Light Yoga Play. So moving on to yet another less conventional character. Well, somewhat. This is a much shorter demonstration. As we mentioned before, armored moves are strong against Falke when you have a good read on what she's going to do. But Armika has an additional option that makes her even more dangerous. You can lump all characters that have good forward moving safe-ish moves, or just good forward moving moves, or uppercuts, all under the same sort of umbrella, but Mika's not quite that. What she has though is the ability to close in on Falke on whiff punishes really easily with her Crouch Heavy Punch, similar to Dalsim's Slide. She can also slide, of course, but since this is the optimal range for Mika to be at anyway, to make that move good, you should in fact be trying to do this at least some of the time. It does not work, interestingly, as well for getting under that unless you're really ready, and then when you do it, it still doesn't necessarily help. But it's not terrible. Simply understand that that move is effectively the equivalent of crush countering Falke in neutral because of the way her hurt boxes and hit boxes work in this version of her. This may change when she is buffed later, but for now, learn to space yourself to do that as well as possible, and you will find that a lot of the time, Falke is slow enough to be counter hit and not really harm Mika that much. But more importantly, when Falke does do her jumping shot, Mika has more options. It is difficult to jump in on Falke as a generality, but Mika reaches really far with her jumping heavy kick, making Falke's shot a generally bad idea, and she can jump from so far away that even under the optimal circumstances, Falke is generally going to have to anti-air pretty early. Fortunately, Psycho Schneider is a relatively easy anti-air to use, but it's still difficult. She's also a character who drops at a particular range that makes safe jumping fairly easy, and that deals with a lot of other problems. But above all that, she has one other major option. When Falke does her shot, Mika can, when she's at the correct range, which is usually about this, same as most other characters, she can in fact just ES wingless it immediately. The problem with this is that it's a difficult reaction to twitch and do because Falke could be doing anything up there, and not everything gets through as easily. But because Falke's shot takes relatively long and Mika's move is effectively invincible to projectiles, you don't have to worry about it trading. You have to worry about being fast enough to do it. This is therefore worth your time to practice if you think you're going to have trouble getting in on her in neutral because the player is spending too much time off the ground and therefore you can't land that move. And because dashing in at Falke with Mika is a little slower than most characters. You could have safely used that when your range for the blocking the forward heavy punch is not quite as far out as most characters are, but that's because Mika's fine at that spacing. Note, I'll demonstrate a couple times maybe until I get meter. This doesn't actually work unless it's EX. Note that Mika can already be in the air on the way up attempting to do it and will get hit. So it's important that you do not get confused about whether or not this works in terms of wingless as a concept. She can also do dash under and Lady Mika quite well, but if you really need it, noting of course that this is a decent knockdown when you do get it. If you really find yourself unable to get in other than with this and your opponent is stopping you from doing that, you do have the option of the ES wingless. The difficulty is of course building up the twitch reaction and therefore building it up in conjunction to all the other things she could be doing, learning to watch Falk's many options. Fortunately, Mika back dashes away from Falk fairly well, so you don't have to worry too much about it. But yeah, staying in that twitchy mode where you know she could be doing something but you're waiting for her to do the right thing to finish her, it's really not a high level tactic. It's for when you're facing that Falk that has managed to block you out of pretty much everything else. You want to be trained enough to be ready to finish her based on that alone. As you can see, I'm totally not. However, we have had Just Fine look at it and confirm that this is a thing that can be done on reaction by a Mika player who actually plays Mika. And therefore that is specifically part of the point system for this character, because while she can just jump, exactly what you get and how Mika's hitbox tends to get stuck out means that Falk doesn't actually take as much damage when Mika jumps on her if you get it wrong. Fortunately, as you can see, Falk also doesn't have a lot of normals that make this a terrible idea. Even if you mess it up, even if you react to the wrong thing, there's a decent chance that, unless they were really expecting the ES wingless specifically, you probably still got them. If they hit the heavy punch too early, for example, or ended up trying to do it because of a switch, because of a forward jump, in which case they become much more susceptible to this, all those things become easier to deal with. But we're probably not going to count on me getting this done, given that it's not my kind of thing. I would have to think of it differently. I'm much better at making sure I don't hit it too early. There you go. So a full demonstration of the shot having gone off, the shot going through Mika, Mika still catching Falk. This is one of her other point systems. So, once again, to briefly review the cast as a generality, and point out more so why I'm not showing off everyone than anything else. So going through, we starting from Ryu. Ryu deals with this by jumping. His jump is good for it. His jumping heavy kick is good for it. He has Tatsu if absolutely necessary. He tends to land good combos, safe jumps well, so on. Ken is the same. Akuma is the same. Nakali is mostly the same. Ed, surprisingly, is about the same. Guile, not so much, but it works relatively similarly. Colleen is a difficult thing, even to explain. I probably won't be doing that immediately. Abigail has some good options with his run into Avalanche, and Blanca can roll under at a particular speed and solve the problem that way. Zaku has Graham to use, but will often trade in weird situations, so you might want to change to young Zaku and get closer instead. Karine has basically every option imaginable. And as shown a little bit, Zangief does not have a lot of options, but his jumping timing is similar to Birdie in that he'll make it if you jump early enough, and his large body size, while it would seem to make it difficult, doesn't actually do so because his jump is much better than it seems. Same goes for Alex, though Alex tends to land less damage for the effort. Ibuki jumps super well, Juri as well. Sakura, mostly the same. Rashid has multiple options, and Laura does as well. Noting for Zangief that his dash is too slow to make this work out well. Nash is borderline. Birdie's dash doesn't work all that well for this purpose. Which leaves us to Fang and Vega basically. Falk herself can jump over her own stuff, yes, it's her dash that makes it difficult. So, let's look at the character with the last custom style version of this. And we're using the grid to show off the most important spacing related things. I'm going to give him meter for this to simplify the demonstration. So we know that Vega's role, the ES version, is projectile invincible, which is relatively helpful in the matchup, but honestly kind of a waste of your meter. The thing we care about most in his case is whether or not his forward attack like that does anything useful. Because we can probably guess that his dash is easily solving it, and for the most part he can just swing out buttons and deal with her a lot of ways. He's much more effective in terms of actually zoning Falk with normals than the other way around, but as you can see, their normals don't necessarily interact too much, so you might have to be a little bit less enthusiastic about it. But once he's gotten the claw off, he's still got some good options. His bigger problem is that sort of move, where he has options that follow, but you can't be as certain of them as with other characters because they're not as safe, and they tend to start up in ways that involve Vega being far away from the enemy at first, and taking quite a while to get to them, giving Falk extra time to do whatever she wants, more or less. And if you mistime certain things with him, you're likely to miss altogether. Which means that he relies a lot more on his good throw range and his dash up than most characters in this situation. However, given the relatively good low half hitbox on his EX, he can in fact punish her, unlike the others, just for basically doing anything. Because once again, once she jumps into the air, as long as she hits anything at all, he has the option of taking advantage of her lack of trip guard. However, that ES move does not go through when she actually uses the shot, unlike Mika, so you have to care. You're just going to get shot out of the air. And at the range Therefore, the point is that even though he could stand at a range where he could punish her with a ton of things for this, and I mean, there's so many things that she does that are punishable by him throwing out EX. It's actually not among his best options. He has to be in the wrong position for it to make sense. Therefore, for him, there is one more point you can get. When Falk goes into the air, despite the fact that she has one of the strongest jumping medium punches ever, Claw also has one of the strongest ways to make sure he never gets anywhere near anything she does. If your reaction to her jumping is to use your far wall dive, you get some more extra options. This is because of the amount of time it takes Falk to come back down after her jumping shot. And because of the difficulty of targeting a lot of her normals and the spacings that she occupies while she's trying to do it. Therefore, using this move preemptively, the way it is normally used, with the opponent having difficulty anti-airing, is actually not the way to deal with her. It's rather something you do reactively to her going into the air herself. As you can see, if you try to do this just raw by yourself, you generally won't get too far. But it is relatively difficult to react to Falk jumping with it. And because of the type of move it is, you have to do it very quickly. He's going to end up trying to spend far more time in the air than her in the first place. Therefore, our suggestion for him is that you don't put too much effort into any of those things, and rather take advantage of his really long dash, his long slide, which can be quite safe if you are at the range where she can't do that much, and will discourage her from jumping as much in the first place. You know, just to get the chance to punish you. But because she doesn't have a quick way forward, she doesn't get as much control over whether or not you can make that move relatively safe for yourself. And she doesn't deal that much damage, so you should consider it to be an option for whiff punishing her in ways similar to the Dalsim Yoga Fire, or for baiting Psycho Schneider. Yes, it is quite likely that your opponent will just hit jab or something. She does have some good options, but she doesn't do a lot of damage when she does those options. And she can't afford to just hit buttons too quickly because she doesn't actually know that you're going to whiff. So, for him, consider it a point to get her to block this move, which is less likely because she's not often blocking. But you're aiming to space yourself so that you end up either with punishing or her blocking that and then seeing what you get afterwards. It really is not that difficult to whiff punish Falk with just slide. And the important part is that most of what she does, other than the same EX Psycho Schneider, will just fail if you whiff. Or if you happen to get blocked at the very tip, you may not get hurt all that badly. So bear that in mind along with the dash up stuff. Therefore, we have no specific suggestions for trying to take Vega's wall dive as any part of your point system. If you think of something, let us know. If you found a way to do it that you also found works on any Falk you actually fight, please let us know. we will gladly add it to the page. In terms of the basic response of jumping at her, his medium kick is basically the required button. The medium punch can do it, but it doesn't lead to much and you have to understand the range quite well. Whereas the medium kick tends to solve most of the problem. His heavy kick is also decent, but for some reason, unlike most characters, he doesn't seem to get as much out of it or land it as often as you'd think. It might be because I'm misunderstanding the spacing that he's supposed to stand at, but I don't quite think so. I think it's just that for whatever reason the hitbox of that doesn't interact as well with her jumping shot as some others. That said, it's certainly not bad. It just has a slightly lower success rate than some other stuff I've seen. And the way it floats her is different, so I suggest using medium kick. Once again, all this information will be up on our website at 2-mk.org/bots. There will be a link to FalkeBot and detailed explanations of all of this at some time between 6 and 7 Eastern on Sunday. So with that, thank you for watching everyone, and I hope that you're successful in your training and able to make the most of our content. Join us next week for Mishmashing Lounge on Monday. There may be some Falk play in that lounge. On Tuesday for Guilty Gear, and on Thursday for Dragon Ball Fighters, Kame House lobbies. Wednesday will be more Street Fighter content, as will next Friday. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good night, everyone.